We're just so happy that Rethinking Rescue is out there now, and very excited and eager to pick your brain. It tells a lot of stories, but fundamentally it explores how human poverty and income inequality affect the fate of animals, and how you can't solve these problems without considering both. And now clearly poverty makes everything so much harder, but could you start by elaborating on this particular connection and some of the specific ways in which poverty impacts animal welfare?
Sure. I think ever since the movement to try to protect domestic animals from euthanasia in the nation's shelter started, the movement has been very focused on getting those animals out of the shelter and finding them homes. Rightly so, because for years and years there was a common practice of simply bringing animals in and killing them because it was assumed that nobody wanted them. But we didn't look so much at how those animals got there in the first place, except to think about their owners, their previous people, as careless or wanting to dump them or getting rid of them the second they became a little bit of trouble. But the truth is, and one of the things that's worth remembering in this discussion is that something like a third of dogs and cats that end up in shelters were let go by the homes that they once had.
Mm.
So what happened that those people let those animals go? Was it that they didn't love them? Was it that they were trouble? Was it that they didn't care? And often the answer is not that. It has to do with money and class and their place in the world. What would cause someone without money to lose a pet? Well, one is that a lot of shelters charge reclamation fees if an animal escapes the yard or gets lost and is picked up. Maybe that doesn't seem like much, but if you are operating on a very strict budget and really don't have extra money and you get to the shelter and they want $50 or $100 before releasing that pet back to you, that might be the reason you say no. Another problem is that veterinary care is expensive and is constantly getting more expensive. The price of veterinary care has risen even faster than human health care over the last decade, in part because there's been a huge corporate and venture capital takeover of veterinary practices. And that ends up not only raising prices, but putting pressure on vets who are already under tremendous pressure to upsell services. You read the statistics on how many Americans live paycheck to paycheck or don't have a couple of $100 in the bank to deal with an emergency. And you have an animal. What if your dog gets hit by a car? What if your animal suffers an ACL or CCL tear? These surgeries are tremendously expensive. And even going to the vet for something smaller, I can tell you, having had 3 rescue dogs myself, there's always blood work. You can't get out for less than $500, $400. And that's really asking a lot from people. How do you pay if you're on a limited budget? How do you pay if you're on work a minimal wage job? You have a couple of options. One is to surrender the animal. The other is to take on catastrophic debt. And that is why some of the animals that belong to people in poverty get surrendered. Humane euthanasia can also be very expensive. And so if you have a suffering pet, a dying pet, there are people who will surrender the animal to the shelter, knowing that a suffering animal will be put down, but they can't be with that animal. They can't hold it while it takes its last breath. And then a final one, and maybe I've forgotten some, but a big one is housing. It is very hard to find affordable housing in this country. It is twice as hard to find affordable housing that accepts a pet. Those
Yeah.
that do sometimes charge pet rent. And that may be just enough to make an apartment or a house unaffordable. Some places charge pet deposits that may or may not be refundable. And people are in a very difficult position when they have animals. In some cases, a landlord might have been looking the other way, even when a lease says no animals, and then a new owner comes in and says everybody's got to get rid of their animals. And you're in the
Yeah.
position of either staying housed with your family or surrendering the pet. And while a lot of people say, I'd rather sleep on the street before I give up my beloved dog or cat, I think that is easy-ish to say when you're not in that position, and not so easy when you really, really might end up sleeping on a sidewalk.
There's so much to unpack there, and I really want to go into all of those issues. Before I ask you the next question, though, I just wanted to mention that New York City has this amazing law, which has been in place for years, like probably 40, 50 years, that says if you've been in your apartment for 3 months and held your animal without hiding the animal, you can't be evicted for a no pet clause. And every community should have that law, because you're exactly right. The reason that happens is usually has nothing to do with the animal. It has everything to do with they want the apartment back.
They want the apartment back. And in many cases, I mean, I wrote about pet rent for Day Magazine, and I looked at some of the statistics that Michelson found when they were writing about pet-friendly housing. They're big proponents of it, but they were looking at the damages that an animal typically caused in a rental unit, and it was tiny. And many people pay for it themselves because they feel bad that it happened. It's not. There's nothing usually that a good cat or a dog will do that will justify $50 a month.
Yeah,
Extra.
Can all be fixed. Like whatever it is can be fixed, even if they
And
chew the wall, which they do occasionally. It's not that big a deal. Well,
No.
anyway, I like I said, I want to get into some of those issues, but before I do that, I just want to make clear to people that this book. I mean, so far we've been talking about very policy things, but it's almost a biography, and focusing on this woman, Lori Weise, and her work is just really a centerpiece of the book, and it's kind of built around it, though it also delves into other issues. Can you just tell us a bit about her? She sounds like an amazing human being, and her work in Los Angeles, and how it so intensely reveals this connection between animal and human suffering at the hands of poverty.
She is an amazing person. And what I found most interesting about her was that we all talk about this now, about the connection between poverty and pet suffering, but we were not talking about it when she began, when she first figured this out. I can't say she's the first person in the United States, but she was certainly one of the first. So she began working at a furniture factory in downtown Los Angeles in the mid 1990s. And she was an animal lover. And downtown, that section of downtown was and remains pretty gritty. And she saw a tremendous number of strays on the street, and it broke her heart, and she wanted to help them. And so she and a coworker started doing a couple of things just ad hoc. Nobody was paying them. They were dipping into their own pockets. They were feeding some of the animals. They were plucking the ones that they thought were strays and taking them to vets and having them sterilized, because they were seeing puppies being born and kittens being born, in alleys with nobody watching out for them. And gradually she came to realize that some of the animals she thought were strays were not strays. They belonged to unhoused people. And she began helping those people, understanding that some of them were not nice people, but some of them were. And some of them did not take what we would call proper care of their pets, not because they were trying to be evil, but because they didn't have the understanding or resources to do so. And so she started helping out. She registered something like 300 dogs to herself because she was told by the local shelter that people without fixed addresses couldn't take out animal licenses. And animal licenses are important for many reasons, but partly because if an animal gets away from you and is taken into the shelter, a license enables that shelter to call you up and say, we have your dog, and to help it get back home. But they wouldn't do that if a person was unhoused. So she registered all those animals to herself